What's best, a 401k or an IRA? What are the pros and cons of each type of retirement account? And the credit reporting agency Experian did what with our Social Security numbers? We'll answer these questions and more on this, the 93rd episode of the Dough Roller Podcast.
Welcome to the Dough Roller Podcast, where the best thing money can buy is financial freedom. We help you make more, spend less, and invest the rest. And now your host, Rob Berger.
Whether you're just starting out, buried under a mountain of debt, or well on your way to financial freedom, this is the podcast to help you take your finances to the next level. Hey, everybody, this podcast is sponsored by Betterment, the most preferred automated investing service. Betterment has cutting-edge technology to optimize returns, minimize taxes, and save you time and money. Join over 34,000 customers who have already streamlined their portfolio management at betterment.com/roller. That's betterment.com/ROLLER. So today we're going to be talking about 401ks and IRAs, the pros and cons, what's different about each. This topic has come up in part because I've just gotten a lot of email from folks on a whole bunch of different topics related to 401ks and IRAs, and I thought, some of it, there's some confusion about the differences and which one's better, and I think in some cases there's even some confusion as to what these things are, and so I thought I'd just cover at a high level, sort of the pros and cons of each as you think through, where it's best for you to keep your retirement savings. Of course, a lot of folks, myself included, you have both, and that's fine too. So we're going to cover that today. Before we do, though, first I wanted to mention a question I received from a listener named John. He wrote in about a week ago. And here's what he wrote. He said, first off, thanks for the podcast. They've taught me so much. And as a young investor just entering the workforce, I believe they have helped me immensely. I was reading a thread on the Bogleheads forum. I will link it below. They are discussing the use of personal capital or Mint-like services. Apparently, some companies such as Fidelity have security clauses that state that using personal capital will void their fraud protections. I was wondering if this was something you had knowledge about, or if this is something new to you as well. Hope all's well, and thanks again. So that was a great question from John. I had not really focused on that issue. He and I have exchanged some emails since then. And just so we're all on the same page here, a couple of things. First of all, Bogleheads Forum. The Bogleheads are named after Jack Bogle, John Bogle, the founder of Vanguard, and they're called the Bogleheads. They've written a great book on investing, which you can find on Amazon, and they have a forum, and it is phenomenal. A great, great forum, and one I highly recommend. And so that's what he's referring to when he talks about the Bogleheads formula. I know it's an odd-sounding name. And, of course, personal capital, I've mentioned it before. It's a service that I use. It's a way to link all of your investments in one place, and it shows you your asset allocation, your fees, your performance. You can check them out if you go to doughroller.net/PC, and that is an affiliate link. Mint, you've probably heard of as well, mint.com. It, too, can track your investments, although I think it's probably better known as a way to track your budget and your banking. But with either of these services, and they're not the only two, there are many others, but with Personal Capital and Mint, you give them your login information to whatever bank and investment accounts and credit card accounts, for that matter, that you want them to track for you. And then they go out and suck in all of the information from these various accounts, and that's how they're able to present it to you all in one place. And it's pretty convenient. It's one of the reasons I like Personal Capital is, if you have investments at more than one institution, as I do, it's an easy way to go in and look at everything at one time. And same thing with Mint, particularly for banking and budgeting. And so his question was a good one. The first thing I did was I emailed Personal Capital, and they got back to me, and their response was okay, although, they're not Fidelity, so they can't speak on behalf of Fidelity. And it just didn't really answer the question. And so I thought, why not just give Fidelity a call? So I got on the phone, called Fidelity. And by the way, their customer service was phenomenal. It took me just maybe 30 seconds to reach someone. She was extremely helpful. If you've listened to my earlier podcast on the $100,000 mistake that I recently made with my retirement savings, you'll know that I was on the phone with Fidelity for that too, and they were fantastic. By the way, if you want to hear about my mistake, it's in podcast 91, doughroller.net/podcast 91. So anyway, Fidelity folks were great. I asked them the question, and they said no, it shouldn't avoid the fraud protection. They did say, you want to make sure you're using a reputable company. But the thing they pointed out, which I thought was interesting, is that Fidelity offers the exact same tool. It's called Full View. I've never used it. You do have to have a Fidelity account to use it. That's one of the things I like about Personal Capital. It's not associated with a specific, financial institution, so you can pretty much use it with anything. But if you do have an account at Fidelity, Full View is an alternative, and I am going to check it out. But they basically do the same thing, where, of course, they already have you have an account there, they have your Fidelity accounts already, but you can put in all of your login information to other investments at Vanguard or wherever, as well as even bank accounts and credit cards. And this Full View tool will effectively do the exact same thing. And at least in terms of bringing in all of your information, the Personal Capital does. Now, again, I've not used Full View. I am going to check it out. So I don't know how I'll like it as compared to Personal Capital. But her point was, look, we do the same thing, and in her view, that wouldn't void the fraud protections that Fidelity offers. So that was their response, and I sent that back to John. But I thought it was an interesting question, and one I wanted to pass on to all of you. Again, I only called Fidelity. For all I know, Vanguard or Schwab or T. Rowe Price or Scottrade or whatever, or any of the banks, maybe they'll have a different policy on this. I don't know. John's question was specific to Fidelity, so that's why I gave them a call. Plus, I have an account there. And anyway, wanted to pass that on to you. The second thing, before we get to the heart of today's episode, is an article I read in the Wall Street Journal. I read it on CNN. And I actually posted it to the Facebook page and the Twitter account that you can follow if you want to. Twitter is the @ followed by Dough Roller, and Facebook, you just go to facebook.com/Dough Roller. And I put it up there today. But I got to tell you, it's really got me angry. So apparently, Experian had, I'm not even sure if it's fair to call it a data breach. But in fact, it's worse than that. Apparently, Experian or one of its subsidiaries or related companies sold a lot of individuals' confidential information to a fraudster in Vietnam. Apparently, this occurred some time ago. I think he was actually arrested in 2013. And the CNN article walked through all of this, and it was it's just amazing. Apparently, Experian has done, again, this is just according to the CNN article, very little to publicize this and to make people aware of this data breach. And in fact, Experian didn't even know about it until who clued Experian into the loss of its own data? The U.S. Secret Service. And apparently the lost data affected, now I don't know if all of this came from Experian, but apparently the criminals had a database with 200 million Americans' personal data, including names, addresses, social security numbers, birthdays, work history, driver's license numbers, email addresses, banking information. I got to tell you, it really burns me up. First of all, I understand that Experian and the other credit reporting agencies, they do sell information about us, right? So that other companies can assess our creditworthiness. They'll do that when we're applying for a loan, whether it's a car loan, mortgage, whatever, credit cards. They'll also sell certain information about us so that folks can market products to us. And but why are they selling our social security numbers? I don't understand that. And why didn't they tell us about this when it happened? Target, it got out that Target's data breach, and that was part of the article on CNN. And of course, they had to deal with the fallout. It's no fun, but it's the right thing to do. Why isn't Experian telling us about this information? And what due diligence are they undertaking before they make this information available to third parties, particularly third parties overseas? Not that it really matters, I suppose, but it just is. I'm just dumbfounded that Experian would do this, and it sounds to me from reading the article, it wasn't, obviously intentional, but you wonder, well, what kind of controls do they have in place to prevent this from happening? What kind of controls did they have in place when it happened? What kind of controls have they changed or added since it happened to protect our information? And so I'm pretty angry about this as I looked at it, and I don't know. If Experian, I'm going to do some more research to see if Experian has come out now with more details about this. But at least according to the CNN article, they made it sound like Experian hadn't actually been all that forthcoming with information. At least that's how I read the article. And that's pretty frustrating. I mean, one of the things in the CNN article, it says it's been more than a year since Experian was notified of the leak, yet the company still won't say how many Americans were affected. Well, why not? I just don't understand that. So anyway, I thought I'd pass that on to you. Not exactly a fun piece of news, but it actually seemed to dovetail kind of nicely with John's email about whether using services like Personal Capital or Mint would avoid a fidelity fraud guarantee. So there you go. All right, 401ks versus IRAs. And I want to kind of start at a high level so that we're all on the same page. I get a number of email from folks who I think sometimes confuse what a 401k or an IRA is on the one hand with the actual investments like mutual funds and ETFs that might go into these types of accounts. And so as a starting point, let's just make sure we're all on the same page. 401ks and IRAs are tax-advantaged retirement accounts. In other words, what you put into 401ks and IRAs, typically, there are a few exceptions, have certain tax advantages. That's the appeal to these types of accounts. With what I think a lot of people refer to as traditional 401ks and IRAs, those that are pre-tax, the advantage is that you put money in and you don't have to pay taxes on that money. It's pre-tax. You put it in, and then your taxes your taxes are calculated based on the remainder of your taxable income. Now that's the good news. When you go to take it out in retirement, that's when you pay the taxes. But that delay, which is obviously particularly for those that have started early, can be decades, will allow you to end up with more money on an after-tax basis in retirement. We've talked a lot about Roth 401ks and Roth IRAs. They kind of work in reverse. You put after-tax dollars into those types of accounts, so you've paid the taxes on them. That's the bad news. But the good news is it grows. Your investments grow tax-free, so you keep it in there hopefully for decades. And when you retire with a boatload of money, let's hope, in your Roth account, it's all tax-free. But the point here is these are tax-advantaged retirement plans or accounts. That says nothing about the type of investment that you actually hold in these accounts, right? You can hold mutual funds. You can hold, and that's true whether they're mutual funds that invest in stocks, domestic or foreign, whether they invest in bonds, domestic or foreign. You can hold ETFs, exchange-traded funds, which are, for all practical purposes, very similar to mutual funds. There are, of course, some important differences, and we've talked about those in the past. But again, you can hold mutual fund or you can hold an ETF. You can hold individual stocks in these types of accounts. You can hold real estate. Actually, in some IRAs, you can hold real estate or precious metals. There's ways to do that. But the thing I want to point out is the 401k or the IRA, on the one hand, is just a type of account. It doesn't tell you what you have invested in those accounts. Of course, we're going to talk about that today. But the 401k or the IRA is separate from the actual investments that you put into them. And I mentioned, I think probably for most people, you're putting mutual funds or ETFs in these. But as I said, you can put stocks, you can put individual bonds, you can hold certificates of deposit in an IRA. So there are other options. But again, I think for most people, what you put into these accounts, typically mutual funds or ETFs. And by the way, if you're wanting to understand the difference between a mutual fund and an ETF, you can check out podcast 39, doughroller.net/podcast 39. But the key takeaway is you think of the 401k or the IRA as sort of an empty bucket. And then the decision is, you've picked whether you're going to contribute to a 401k, an IRA, or perhaps both. Then the decision is, okay, well, what am I going to invest in? I'm going to put this money into these types of accounts, but that doesn't, my job doesn't stop there. Now I got to figure out what kind of investments how I'm going to put my money to work, what I'm going to invest in. And we'll talk a bit about that here in a little bit. That's the first thing I wanted to point out. The second thing, and this is really a key difference between the 401k and the IRA, is that a 401k is tied to employment. And if you're with a charitable organization, you may be familiar with a 403b, different than a 401k, but by and large the same. These are both tied to employment. Your employer will offer, hopefully, this type of retirement account for you to save for your retirement in a 401k, or as I said, in some cases, a 403b. An IRA is not. An IRA is something you're going to go out and open on your own, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. And maybe that's worth a podcast in and of itself, how you actually go about doing that. But with an IRA, you're going to go to a Vanguard, for example, and open up an IRA. You got something you're going to do on your own. Or you're going to go to Betterment, for example, another option. You can open up an IRA at banks. You can open up my SEP IRA. It's a whole different kind of IRA we're not going to get into today. It's for those that are self-employed. But I opened up my SEP IRA at Scottrade, a broker. But the key here, I want to make sort of the second high-level key distinction is 401ks, they're with your employer. Your employer offers them. And with an IRA, you have to go out on your own and figure out where you're going to open up the IRA. And of course, that oftentimes depends on what you want to invest in. But I want to just make that sort of initial distinction clear. 401k is tied to employment. IRA is not. Now with that, let's sort of walk through, I think what we'll do today is walk through the pros and cons. I mean, like anything in personal finance and investing, it's not the case that the 401k is always better or the IRA is always better. They have pros and cons. And again, for some people, you might max out your 401k and max out your IRA. That's what we do. But for others, you've got a choice. Maybe you don't have that much money to put away. And so you were thinking, well, gee, do I start with an IRA or do I start with a 401k? And sometimes that decision gets even more complicated. You may be at a job thinking, well, I'm going to leave my job in a year. So should I bother with a 401k? Because then I'm just going to have to figure out what to do with it. So kind of all those questions, let's kind of walk through the pros and cons. And we'll start with the IRA. So the first sort of, I guess, advantage is that I mentioned you have to go out on your own and open this, which can seem like a disadvantage. It's like that's a bit of a pain. But there's sort of a silver lining there, and that is you're not dependent on your employer, right? I mean, your employer may not offer a 401k, for example. Well, that's okay. It doesn't affect an IRA. You can go out you don't need your employer. You can go out on your own. In fact, you have to go out on your own to get an IRA. And I should say, again, there's always exceptions. Some of you might be saying, well, wait, Rob, can an employer offer an employee a SEP IRA? Yes. But I'm kind of focused here on what's more typical. And so I think for the vast majority of people, at work you have a 401k, and if you want an IRA, you go out and open it on your own. But again, that can be an advantage because you're not relying on your employer. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that gives you a lot of control. You decide where you're going to open up your IRA. It's up to you. So for example, my employer, and we'll get to the 401k in a minute, my employer uses Fidelity. I don't have a choice. If I want to contribute to my 401k, I've got to use Fidelity. Now, it turns out I'm perfectly happy with Fidelity. They have a lot of great low-cost index funds. Oddly enough, one of my options is a Vanguard fund that I take advantage of. So I'm very happy with the 401k. But the point is I don't have any choices. It's not my choice to make with the 401k. But with the IRA, it is my choice. I get to choose where I want to open up the IRA. And now, for some, that may seem scary. It's like, I don't know what to do. I'm kind of stuck here. I don't have a clue as to what I should do. I think for most people, it's actually not that complicated. And if you're new to this, it may feel that way. But I'll give you a kind of what I think are sort of three good options for an IRA. You get this control. It can seem scary, but it really isn't. I think here are, in my view, three real good options for opening up your IRA. The first is if you want a really hands-off approach, you don't want to have to worry about picking individual mutual funds, let alone maybe picking individual stocks, then something like Betterment. As you know, Betterment's a sponsor of this show. I have a Betterment account. I like Betterment. There is some extra fees when you go with Betterment. They're very low, but you are paying some small fees over and above the cost of the ETFs that Betterment invests in. And if that seems scary, don't worry about it because you don't have to pick the ETFs. When you invested in Betterment, you have to make one decision. How much of your money do you want invested in stocks and how much do you want in bonds? That's it. And once you make that decision, and they have a lot of tools to help you, you're done. They do the rest. They have the ETFs that they use. They're all low cost. I don't know if they're all indexed ETFs. I assume they are, but I know that at a minimum the majority are. A lot of them are from Vanguard. They deal with that. They deal with reinvesting dividends. They deal with rebalancing. That's probably if you're scared of investing. To me, that's sort of the easiest way to get started. Would be something like a Betterment, and they do offer IRAs. So that's the first of three options that I'll mention. The second one is at a mutual fund company, whether it's Fidelity or Vanguard. I have my IRAs at Vanguard. Very, very easy. You can open them up online in a couple of minutes. You can give them a call. They'll walk you through it and answer all your questions. When I was looking at a solo 401k at Fidelity, which I'm, for reasons that are maybe for another show, I have to put off opening until next year. But the folks at Fidelity literally walked me through the application over the phone. I mean, it was that easy. Now, a solo 401k is frankly a lot more complicated to set up. Not a lot more. It's more complicated than a simple, just an IRA. But the point is, folks at Fidelity, folks at Vanguard, or any of the other major mutual fund companies will walk you through the process. Now, the difference is once you've opened up that IRA, you then have to pick mutual funds. You have to decide what you want to invest in. And, I've recorded a lot of podcasts about that. So hopefully you've kind of been following along. But probably the place to start, if you haven't been, if maybe you're new to the show, is to start with podcasts about creating an asset allocation plan. And that would be podcast 25, dooroller.net/podcast25. Here's the easy thing, though. It may seem overwhelming to have to pick a mutual fund, but all of the big mutual fund companies make it easy. There are mutual funds where, not unlike Betterment, you can put all your money in one single mutual fund, and it will spread your money out over stocks and bonds in a plan that works for you. And the folks, you can call any of them, and they'll walk you through it. Very easy. So that's the second option for an IRA, so a mutual fund company, right? And the third one that I'll mention is a brokerage company. I mentioned I opened up my SEP IRA at Scottrade, and I'm very happy with Scottrade. And one of the reasons I picked Scottrade was because they have actual physical offices. They're not just an online company. And so, and I would go in there frequently. I mean, there was an office right near my work, and I would go in there when I needed to. And so, that was very convenient, and the site was easy to use. I picked a brokerage in that instance because I wanted to invest in individual stocks. So if you want to invest in individual stocks, a brokerage, a discount broker is probably the best option, although mutual fund companies will still work. Vanguard has a brokerage arm. You could use Vanguard. In fact, I do that as well. So, but those are really the three options. There's others. Like I said, you can open up even at a bank. But I think for most people, something sort of the one-and-done approach of Betterment, it's very easy. A mutual fund company, particularly, by the way, if you want to invest in mutual funds of that company. If I want to invest in Vanguard funds, why would you open it up anywhere else? Just open it up at Vanguard. And then the third option are brokerage accounts. But again, the real key takeaway for today is one of the advantages of an IRA is you get to choose where you open it up. As I said, often the choice depends on the kinds of things you want to invest in. And that kind of brings me to another advantage of an IRA is you have complete control over the investments you choose. And you can invest in just about any mutual fund you want, depending on where you open up the account, or individual stocks or what have you. If you have a 401k, you know that by and large, you don't have that flexibility. There are some exceptions. Brokerage Link is something that Fidelity offers where you get more options. But by and large, you're limited to the investments that are in your company's 401k. And, in some cases, it works out fine. You get some great options. In my case, I would say we have good options. I have enough good options that it makes it okay for me. There are some really bad options in our 401k, but there are enough good options that I'm perfectly fine with it. But with an IRA, you get to decide. Again, all that choice can seem a little unnerving at first if you're new to this, but trust me, having that flexibility in the long term is a great thing. That's an advantage of an IRA. So, what are the disadvantages? Well, one is lower contribution limits, right? Your contribution limit, if you're under 50 in 2014, is $5,500. For those 50 and older, you can boost that by $1,000. But the contribution limits are much, much lower than they are for a 401k. We'll come to the 401k contributions in a minute. And by the way, I know there are a lot of numbers in all of this. The show notes for today's episode, which again will be at dooroller.net/podcast93, podcast 93. I'll have these numbers in the show notes. I'll have a lot of links to additional information. So, you can follow along during the episode, but I encourage you to check out the show notes for a lot of these numbers and this information. So the first negative, IRA, lower contributions. By the way, something that drives me crazy. I just don't get that. I mean, if you have a job but let's say your employer doesn't offer a 401k, so you're limited to an IRA. So why shouldn't you be able to contribute as much as someone who has a job with a 401k? I don't know. Anyway, that's the rule. So that's the first sort of negative. An IRA has a much lower contribution limit. Second thing is, not all contributions to an IRA are deductible. Let's put aside the Roth IRA for a moment. But just because you put money in an IRA, don't assume the contributions are deductible. Whether they're deductible depends on, one, whether you have a retirement plan at work. If you don't have a retirement plan at work, your contributions are deductible. And assuming if you're married, you've also got to factor in whether your spouse does. See, the rules get kind of complicated. You got to look at whether you have a workplace plan. If you're married, whether your spouse has a workplace plan, and then you have to look at your income if you have a workplace plan. If neither of you have a workplace plan, or you're single and you don't have a workplace plan, then the IRA contribution is deductible. But if there is a 401k, 403b, for you or your spouse, then you have to look at your income, and the rules get kind of complicated. There's a link in the show notes where you can look at the rules if that may be your situation, but it's something to mention. Don't assume your contributions to an IRA are deductible. They may not be. The third sort of, I don't know if it's a negative, but it's just something to be aware of. If you like to invest in a Roth, well, again, your income could disqualify you for investing in a Roth IRA. Again, we'll have links in the show notes so you can look at the numbers. We've talked about this, and we've also talked about the option of a backdoor Roth. That's episode 40, doorroller.net/podcast 40. So you can check that out. That is an option if you're otherwise not able to invest in a Roth IRA directly. By the way, kind of an aside, I do a ton of reading on the internet, probably more than I probably should. And there's a blog that I follow that I want to recommend. And the reason I mention this is because he had an article actually about backdoor Roths. And I think I'm pronouncing his name right. It's Kitzes, I think. Kitzes.com. It's KITCES.com. And it's a website, but there's a blog component. And he is a certified financial planner. Actually, if you look at the letters after his name, I think they're like a mile long. He's like 100 different things. And very brainy stuff on his site. I mean, it is very well done. A very sophisticated, high-level analysis of retirement issues and everything else. And I mention it because I was reading an article in his blog about backdoor Roths and whether putting in after-tax dollars into an IRA and then immediately converting it to a Roth, whether the IRS could ever step in and disallow that. Now, I don't know of an instance where that has actually happened, but he talked about that in a post that I read the other day, and I won't go into the details of that, but I just mentioned that. It's a very good website. I think his work is excellent. And if you really just want to roll up your sleeves and get into this stuff deep, that is a good place to go. And by the way, again, when I see stuff of his I post it to the Twitter account for Doe Roller. I post it to the Facebook page, so you'll see it there too if you follow either one of those. Okay, so we kind of at a high level talked about the pros and cons of IRAs. There'll be some others, as you'll see in a minute, but let's move to the 401k. And let's talk about the pros. Well, the first one is the higher contribution limits that we talked about, right? $17,500 is the current limit in 2014. And if you're 50 or above, you get what they call a catch-up contribution. You can tack on another $5,500. So the contribution limit's much higher on a 401k than an IRA. The other big advantage, and I suppose you could view this as a disadvantage for IRAs, but I view it more as an advantage or potential advantage for 401ks, and that is a lot of employers match some amount of the contributions. Again, not all of them do. My current employer does not. Boo. But my previous employer matched dollar for dollar up to, I want to say 6%, and boy, does it allow your 401k to grow fast. It was unbelievable. That was wonderful. So huge advantage to 401ks if you work somewhere that matches your contributions. The next one, I put this in the pros category. I could have probably just as easily put it in the cons category, and that is you can borrow from your 401k. Now, not all plans allow it, but the IRS does, and most plans do. The general rule is you can borrow up to half of your what you have invested in your 401k to a max of, I think it's either 50 or 51,000. I'll get that number right and make sure I've got it in the show notes correctly. So you can borrow from a 401k, and if you do, when you have to pay interest, and the interest goes back into your account, which certainly is a benefit. But there's all kinds of issues. If you lose your job or change your job, then you got to pay the loan back quickly. If you don't, it can be viewed as a distribution, and you get penalized in taxes. And so and then your money is, of course, out of the market while you're borrowing it. There's a lot of negatives to borrowing from your 401k. But like anything else in personal finance, there are pros and cons. So I with a lot of fear and trepidation, I put borrow from your 401k as a 401k pro, as opposed to the cons list. I mean, you guys will tell me if I got that right or not. But that is one feature of a 401k that is not a feature of an IRA. The other thing is it's just easy. They're easy to set up. I like the control and flexibility you get with an IRA, but of course you got to go out on your own and set it up. With your 401k, your employer does all the work for you. They'll give you paperwork when you start, and you can sign up online, and they withdraw the contributions right from your paycheck, and it's easy. And in fact, some companies now will sign you up automatically, auto-enroll. Some will even automatically increase your contributions. Now, of course, you can go in and change all of this stuff. That there's sort of an interesting studies and analysis as to whether auto-enroll features in a 401k plan encourage people to save more. And studies show that actually they do. The companies with an auto-enroll feature, more of their employees participate in a 401k plan and contribute more. But in any event, the point is 401ks are easier. Again, I don't think IRAs are hard to set up at all, as I mentioned, but it does take a little more legwork. All right, how about some disadvantages to the 401k? Well, of course, one, as we kind of already alluded to with the IRA, less flexibility. You're stuck with your employer's choice in terms of the provider and the investments that you can choose from. That's probably, I think, the biggest disadvantage of a 401k is that you're limited in choices of investments. That's the biggest disadvantage in my experience, and can be for some a significant one. I mean, I've received emails from folks that say, "Man, the choices are awful. The least expensive fund is 125 basis points." And now I will say, if that's you, go to your employer, go to HR, tell them about it. I've done that in the past. My old job, I complained about the options, and they eventually, I don't know if it was because of my complaining or complaining is the wrong word. Constructive criticism. That's what I gave my previous employer. But they listened eventually, and we got better options. I don't know if it was because of me or other folks or whatever, but it can work. So that's the biggest potential disadvantage of a 401k, limited and often poor investment options. Hopefully that's not the case with your 401k. There can be waiting periods as to when you can begin to contribute to an employer's 401k. So that's another potential disadvantage. So that's something to consider as well. The last thing I'll mention, and this actually is not in the show notes, but I'll mention it anyway. Legally, there are some differences between a 401k and an IRA as to the ability of, say, a creditor to get at your retirement money. And you can think about situations either where you've been sued, for example, or bankruptcy kind of situation. And the general view is, and I will just say up front, I've not studied this myself. This is based on what I've read, that it's harder, if not impossible, for a creditor to get at a 401k than it is an IRA. But there are more protections for an IRA today than there used to be. A lot of it depends on the state you're in. I've also heard that while a 401k is safer than an IRA, that might not be true with a solo 401k. So I'm not going to provide any more guidance than that on that issue, in part because I've just not looked at it any further than a little bit of research online. It's just not been an issue for us. But if it is an issue for you, if that's a concern for you, it's something that I would recommend you spend some more time researching and maybe getting some professional advice on that from a lawyer or a certified financial planner. There are, I guess the big takeaway is there are some differences between a 401k and an IRA in that regard. And so that kind of gives you, at least at a high level, my view of the differences between a 401k and an IRA. So which one's best? Well, that just depends, right? I mean, certainly if you have an employer match, to me, hands down, the 401k wins. If you don't have an employer match, to me, it comes down to what your investments are in your 401k. If you have great investments, why not do a 401k to start? It's easy, simple, higher contribution limits. And then if there aren't great investments, then to me, an IRA is a great option, assuming that it's an option for you in terms of it being deductible. I talk a little bit about this in terms of the order of where you should invest your money in podcast 37, The Perfect Retirement Plan. Perfect may have been a bit of a embellishment, but I at least walk through how I think through these issues, where should you invest first. So you can check that out at doughroller.net/podcast 37, podcast 337. And now the other thing I'll say, this issue of, well, what if I'm going to change jobs quickly? I'm only going to be here for another year. I've had people email me with that kind of question, and do I bother with a 401k? And it's worth certainly considering that. But I will say this: it's so easy to roll over a 401k. I've done it before. It's easy. Whether you want to roll it over into an IRA, which is what I've done, or you can roll 401ks over to your new employer into their 401k. That's an option. You'll obviously want to understand their investment choices before you do, but that's an option. And in some cases, you can just keep your 401k with your old employer. That's another option. But the point is, even if you're going to roll it over, very, very, very easy to do. I've rolled over, I guess, 2 different 401ks now into an IRA. Very easy. I've moved my SEP IRA from Scottrade to Vanguard. I love Scottrade. It had more to do with consolidating for the sake of my wife, trying to make all of our investments a little easier for her to follow. One less thing for her to have to worry about. Should I get hit by a truck? Frankly, was the reason I did that. But loved Scottrade, still do, but moved it over there. Very, very easy. So, and maybe I'll put a podcast together on exactly how you do that. In fact, I will, because there are different ways to roll over, say, a 401k to an IRA, and there are some gotchas you do have to watch out for. The good news is, if you're going to roll something over to, say, Vanguard, the thing you do, just call Vanguard. And again, I use Vanguard as examples a lot because that's where I have a lot of my investments. But it'd be true with Betterment, Fidelity, T. Rowe Price, Schwab, whatever. They have people that do nothing but help folks like you and me roll over their 401k to one of their IRAs. They would love to help you because it's business for them. So very, very easy to do. Well, there you go. At a very high level, that's the difference between 401ks and IRAs, the pros and cons of both. Kind of my thoughts on where I would put my money first. But again, podcast 37 will give you more details on that. And there you go. Again, you can get the show notes at doughroller.net/podcast93. And as always, if you have any questions, shoot me an email. I'm proud to announce that as of today, July 25th, 2014, I've caught up on my email. I've responded to every email you guys have sent me. It was not an easy task, but I did it. I'm up to speed. So if you haven't gotten a response from me, that means I didn't get your email or it blew up somewhere in my inbox. So don't hesitate to email me back. Love to get your questions, your comments, dr@doughroller.net. Hey, until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.